Now, the Nielsen streaming ratings for the week of June 20th just came out, and like with the previous week, The Acolyte is nowhere to be found. It once again could not crack the top 10, and mind you, this was the week of the 5th episode. This was the big lightsaber fight episode, the big spectacle episode, the one that you really might think may have done pretty well just because there are some out there who enjoy a good saber fight, if nothing else, Star Wars. Or at least there used to be. Like I argued in a recent video, I honestly don't think in this day and age of audiences kind of taking spectacles for granted, that a cool lightsaber fight is enough to lure in the average person anymore, the average viewer, who is kind of used to quality special effects in pretty much all streaming shows, along with getting a great story. One that I'm not so sure that The Acolyte offers if we stack it up against some of the other shows of the day. I'm not so sure that The Acolyte was the best written show ever. Though, in all fairness here, this episode of The Acolyte, again the 5th one, was only 35 minutes long, and more like 30 minutes when you take out the opening and end credits and the recap and all of that. And none of the previous episodes had been all that long either. So in other words here, it doesn't have as much watch time to be watched in the first place, or as much as some of the other shows on this list do. It is competing against shows that may have episodes that are twice as long, and that have more episodes overall, not to mention some streaming services like Netflix tend to drop the whole season or chunks of the season all at once, and that will give them an edge too. And though those are certainly valid points, and also keep in mind Nielsen only gives us the top 10, so The Acolyte, for all we know, was in 11th place and just missed the top 10. But even still, this is Star Wars we're talking about here. This is, or once was, the biggest franchise in the world. This is a franchise that 9 years ago with The Force Awakens took the world by storm with its return and was everywhere, was talked about by everyone, as it made roughly $2 billion at the global box office. And now here we are talking about a brand new Star Wars show that couldn't beat out the mayor of Kingstown to be one of the top 10 most watched shows in a week. And so, of course, the questions that kind of inevitably come out of all of this are, the ones I get asked more than any other questions are, what happened to Star Wars and how can they get things back on track if they can? And really what I'm going to do in this video is just sort of throw some ideas out there, some things to think about, you could say. This won't be the most comprehensive list of things wrong with Star Wars ever, because I think there's sadly a ton of things we could probably look at that have led to the current state of the franchise. So these are just the few things I want to talk about and see what others have to say about them. I'd love to hear feedback on what you think about them in the comments below. Or you can also, by all means, just tell me either what you personally take issue with when it comes to modern Star Wars, what you're not liking about it, assuming you do have issues with it, maybe you're loving it, and you can tell me why you are. Or tell me what you think the larger problem might be that is seemingly driving so many people away. Why do you think it went from, over the course of a decade, from movies everyone went to see, to shows that no one really cares about watching, relatively speaking, of course? And I do think that's part of the problem. I don't know that Star Wars has made the transition from big screen to small screen very well at all. Despite me just basically saying that no, special effects aren't king anymore, they're not everything. They're not as special as they once were, if you will. They've kind of become commonplace, or good ones are kind of expected or taken for granted. But I do think many out there just see Star Wars as a fun movie theater experience. I do believe the average person out there doesn't, well, to put it very bluntly, I don't think they take Star Wars very seriously. Certainly not the way some of us fans do, though some fans also don't take it too seriously, and more on that in a bit. But I do think the reason a lot of people will go to a theater to watch a Star Wars movie is simply to have fun with it for 2 hours and then to leave the galaxy behind until next time. And so maybe the idea of a Star Wars show in general, a long, drawn-out, multi-episode story, if you will, that perhaps delves a bit into the lore of the galaxy, is just not what they think of Star Wars as or want from it in the first place. It's not something they see themselves getting into. And this could be one of the reasons why the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian actually worked so well. It was more fun and episodic in nature, especially the first season. It wasn't trying to be much more than an adventure of the week style show that happened to also have a massive success with Grogu on its hands. I've talked before about how many people I personally know, and I'm guessing they're not the only ones, but I know many people that loved The Mandalorian simply for Grogu and kinda Din too, or because of the dynamic between them, but they only liked it for them. They didn't become Star Wars fans per se. They didn't go back and watch the films or look forward to the other stuff coming out. They didn't want to know about or care about the lore of the galaxy. They simply became fans of those characters, or just Grogu maybe, and just enjoyed how fun the show was. In fact, going along with this, one of the biggest complaints I tend to see about a lot of these Star Wars shows in general, or from more of the casual fans or the general audience perspective, as well as some of the more dedicated and hardcore fans as well, is they'll say they're missing the fun, that they want something more lighthearted and that focuses just on the adventure and that sort of thing. This is oftentimes a criticism I see against a show like Andor, that it wasn't Star Wars because it was too serious and not enough fun. There are even some out there, some fans, who will sort of defend some of these new shows that have come out, excluding Andor, shows that have arguably had pretty bad writing or something else about them that was just not so good. And they'll do that by saying that Star Wars has always had this sort of writing. It's always been a little cheesy and or campy or a bit goofy. This is nothing new, that it was never meant to be or was supposed to take itself all that seriously, and nor are you supposed to take it that seriously. They'll even go so far as to excuse what are objectively pretty bad elements of a show by saying a previous movie maybe did something very similar to this, and that it is just inherently a part of Star Wars now. Because you screwed up once, you get to make the same mistake repeatedly, I guess. That it is or was or still is being intentionally made bad or something, and that's actually good or should be tolerated and or expected even. That the bad elements are part of the charm of Star Wars is something I literally hear a lot of people say. And I think the strange thing about this argument, well, there's a lot of strange things about it, but I think perhaps the strangest thing about those fans who defend what Disney does by saying Star Wars is meant to be kind of bad, I guess, that it's supposed to just be fun and not take itself too seriously, and that the bad parts are actually the good parts because it made those mistakes before, is the fact that when you look back at what is usually considered to be the best Star Wars movies, the ones people like the most and say are, just simply the best films, well, they tend to be The Empire Strikes Back from the original trilogy and Revenge of the Sith from the prequels. And what do those two movies have in common? Well, I'd say they're both the most serious and dark of the original 6 George Lucas Star Wars films. I would say they have the least amount of fun in them and the least amount of mistakes or bad writing in their respective trilogies. And some will say Yoda was a silly character in Empire, which, sure, he was for a little bit, but it was part of the bigger story, and it was trying to teach Luke a lesson. Yoda isn't actually all that silly of a character outside of when he acted like one. But anyway, my point is that most will agree that the pinnacle of Star Wars, the very best films and the best it's ever been, are the ones that, again, take themselves very seriously. People tend to like Star Wars the most when stuff gets real, if you will. Which isn't to say people don't like the more fun movies or that Star Wars should always lean into being very serious all of the time. But this idea that Star Wars should be goofy and poorly written, that it's part of what people love about it, what makes it good even, doesn't seem to hold up when you ask fans what their favorite films actually are, or what they'd say the best films are. Even with the sequels, the one many who enjoy the sequels, the one many will say is the best of them is The Last Jedi. And though there was some dumb humor in that film for sure, of the sequel films, I would say it easily took itself the most seriously and was the only one that really attempted to do something a little deeper with the story that had any sort of real theme going on. In other words here, I'm not saying Star Wars can't ever be fun, or that each movie or show can't try to find a way to incorporate some humor or some levity. Most Star Wars does have some fun in it, certainly. But the idea that Star Wars is somehow best when it's at its worst, that just because a stormtrooper hit his head in A New Hope, or because Luke missed a kick in Return of the Jedi, we should happily embrace whatever bad or silly stuff or some just plain bad writing that they want to give us today, makes no sense and seems to go against what people actually want from Star Wars. I think many who say it's missing the fun, that cite that as the sort of main problem with a lot of Star Wars these days, don't even know what's so off about it in the first place, because they too have maybe been convinced that bad writing is supposed to be how Star Wars is. That this belief could be so pervasive that they'll watch these shows, recognize the bad writing, and think it's supposed to be that way, and that if it were only fun at the same time, the bad writing would be better? And they don't even realize that, though sure, they can like and enjoy the fun parts, but it's actually the well-written, more serious parts of Star Wars that they maybe enjoy the most, or that actually make it worth watching. Or that you can, as crazy as it sounds, you can have something that is a bit fun and silly, but also be very well written and take itself kind of seriously, or very seriously. And so I honestly think one of the main problems with Star Wars is that there just is this belief out there that to some degree it is meant to be bad, and that again, that is somehow part of its charm or what makes it good. And again, you have fans that will say almost this exact thing. But then the problem is you have people who have little or no past experience with Star Wars, who have no vested interest in it, and they're watching it today and, well, not seeing any of the charm in the bad parts. They're just finding it bad, and they stop watching. And you're certainly not going to convince them to watch by saying or insisting that it's supposed to be bad, or that's actually kind of what makes it good. And though, yes, we could get into other problems Star Wars has that has maybe led to its current situation, we could discuss how many feel that there is an agenda behind it these days, or that it has gone woke, that in an effort to be for everyone, to be as inviting as possible for all different types of people, it's kind of become something different. And though, as I've said before, I do think it could try to be a bit more inviting. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have an issue with more female characters in Star Wars, or whatever it might be. But I also think that, when done well, Star Wars already can be appealing to damn near anyone who is prone to like it for what it is. I think long before Disney ever came along, it had fans of all types, obviously. And that trying to tailor it to different groups, especially this desire to bring in more female fans, when plenty have already loved it for a long time, it has not done them any favors. As my wife recently said to me, and she loves Star Wars, but she doesn't think it's something that you can make women love. Adding more of them or featuring them all the time isn't going to turn a woman or a girl who doesn't enjoy sci-fi and fantasy into one who suddenly does. The same way there are plenty of boys or men out there who don't like this kind of stuff either, and never will. And so, setting that aside for now, though acknowledging, yes, it is part of the problem, I think Star Wars has a major identity crisis. I don't think the average person on the outside looking in, who has maybe seen some of the older stuff, be that the OT or the prequels or both, and that has maybe seen some of the new stuff, maybe some of the new films, or has checked out a show on Disney+, I don't think they have any idea what this is even supposed to be anymore. Heck, I don't think a lot of us hardcore fans know what this is supposed to be anymore either. I think many watch the new stuff and find it kind of generic and boring. Many of us watch it only because it's Star Wars and would turn it off if it wasn't. It's just not very good, especially compared to other shows of a comparable budget. It doesn't stack up more often than not. And to be honest, I'm not even sure those making it, those at Lucasfilm, and maybe especially those making it in some cases, I don't think they know what it should be either. I think they take from things that worked in the past, they dig into the old bag of tricks, reshape it a bit, maybe put a fresh coat of paint on it, and then throw it at the wall and hope it sticks. I don't think they have any clue whatsoever on how to actually move Star Wars forward. To keep it what it is or always has been at the core, while also making it something fresh and new. And I mean truly fresh and new. I'm not talking about the Acolyte that ended up sort of deconstructing the Jedi that guts the very soul of the franchise that so many fans love or loved Star Wars for in the first place, and at the same time then kind of makes this case for the bad guys that maybe they aren't so bad. This all kind of directly stabs at the very heart of what the franchise is supposed to be, and then they wonder why so many didn't like it because they think they're doing something new and interesting with the franchise finally, when in reality they're just destroying the old. They're offering you a hollowed out husk of Star Wars that you're supposed to love because it's called Star Wars, and you're supposed to clap and get excited for more of it because they had Darth Plagueis peek his head out of a cave for 2 seconds. And in all reality, I do think that kind of part of the problem is that, yes, George Lucas made it, or how he made the original one way and how he made the prequels another way, how they both have a different feel and focus, if you will, how the two trilogies, yes, feel like part of the same thing, but also feel kind of different from one another. I think that is a big part of the problem they're facing with Star Wars right now. And I don't know that it can necessarily be fixed or resolved by trying to constantly recycle the old or to give us new takes on what has already been done. Disney Star Wars, to survive or to finally thrive, needs to find its own identity. It needs to truly become its own thing. And I'm not saying it should become something radically different. I'm not saying that at all. Or that it has to abandon anything and everything that had to do with George Lucas Star Wars. You do still need to keep the heart and soul intact. You can't lose the spirit of Star Wars, or you may as well just make a new franchise. But you need to find a way to incorporate it into a new body. You need to take what people love about it and find a new way to explore it. You can't just keep propping up and dressing up all the old stuff and trying to squeeze a little bit more magic out of it. You actually have to think of something and create something new already. Something that, again, keeps the spirit of the old alive, but is also kind of its own thing. Well, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time, and now it is your turn to take to the comments below. And again, tell me what you think of what I had to say here, or tell me what you personally think is wrong with Star Wars, or why you think it is going in the wrong direction on the whole, or tell me what you love about it if it is doing great in your opinion. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.